Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Chris Turner. I'm a research fellow in food systems and public health nutrition, the Natural Resources Institute, University of Greenwich. This has been nicely introduced. I'm really pleased to be here. And today I'm going to talk about concepts and emerging evidence from food environment research in low middle income countries. So I've been asked to pitch this presentation as an introductory session, as there may be people here that are relatively new to this area of research. So I'm going to start by presenting some of the key concepts around food environments. And recent years have seen growing global interest in food environments in response to the need to improve dietary, nutrition, and health outcomes worldwide. And this is reflected in the prominence of food environment concepts in recent high-profile reports, such as those shown at the bottom of the slide here. A number of recent food environment conceptual frameworks have sought to map the multiscalar determinants of diets, nutrition, and health. And these frameworks typically build on multiscalar models of health determinants. So here are a couple of examples of socio-ecological models of determinants of health and well-being in neighborhoods. The concentric circle design captures the multiscalar determinants of health and well-being. And looking at these examples, it's clear to see how they've developed with time, adding layers to capture additional depth and complexity as thinking around these areas has evolved. Story et al. Made a significant contribution to the literature in 2008 by mapping the multiscalar determinants of what they termed food and eating environments, spanning the macro level, physical level, social level, and individual level factors, as well as a set of mediating factors at each of these levels, which are denoted by the boxes with the dashed outline. So here you can see the shift towards thinking around food environments and some of these key aspects at each of the levels, along with the mediating factors. More recent frameworks have continued to refine this socio-ecological approach, such as this example by Downs et al. From 2020, that identifies food environment typologies such as built, wild, and cultivated food environments, as well as a series of individual level factors, and sort of identifying and building upon some of those frameworks that you've seen earlier. Recent years have also seen increasing consensus around the food environment as an interface within the wider food system, where consumers interact with food sources to acquire and consume foods. So as you can see in the figure here at the bottom of the slide, we have the food system from farm all the way on the left to flush all the way on the right-hand side. And we have this white sphere, or this interface of the food environment, which is comprised of diverse food sources, including, for example, A, market-based sources, which could be formal or informal. B, own production, which could be rural, peri-urban, or urban, wild food harvesting, and also transfers and gifts. So as part of my PhD research at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, I led the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Food Environment Working Group. And the working group published a technical brief on concepts and methods for food environment research in LMICs in 2017, that you can see here in the top left-hand corner. This was further developed and refined into the article published in Global Food Security that you can see on the right-hand side, which contained a new conceptual framework for food environment research. So the ANH Food Environment Working Group framework that you can see here seeks to unpack the food environment as an interface within the wider food system. It identifies external and personal food environment domains, drawing from socio-ecological theory. So the external food environment contains a series of dimensions, including food availability, prices, vendor and product properties, and marketing and regulation. It's very much the world of opportunities and constraints that are out there. The personal food environment domain contains dimensions such as accessibility, affordability, convenience, and desirability. So these are very much dimensions that are relative to individuals. And interactions between the various domains and dimensions are what we consider to shape food acquisition and consumption. And these interactions, they may be vertical within domains, they may also be horizontal across domains, or indeed both. And the relative importance of the various dimensions is likely to be different across different settings, and also amongst different people, even within the same setting. And this framework has been adapted within the wider literature, for example, by UNICEF in 2018, as part of their Food Systems for Children and Adolescents framework. It's also known as the Inocenti framework. As well as the UNSCN in their Nutrition 44 Bulletin, and more recently as part of their COVID-19 response. So here's an exploded view of the framework with a series of additional dimensions that I've included. Those in green are dimensions that I have included based upon evidence from my PhD research in peri-urban Hyderabad in India. These include food safety within the external food environment domain, which has been elevated from vendor and product properties where it was previously located due to its importance, as well as social capital and the role of peer influence in the personal food environment domain. The dimensions in orange were actually identified through a recent collaboration with the Drivers of Food Choice team from the mapping of evidence and principal investigator perspectives from 15 Drivers of Food Choice projects across a range of LMICs. I won't go into too much details here in the interest of time, but suffice to say our conceptual understanding is continuing to evolve as we apply and test these concepts in a range of LMIC settings. So lastly, on concepts, the most recent high-level panel of experts report from 2020 builds on the concept of the food environment as an interface, and it frames the food environment within the wider food system, supply chains with consumer behaviors and also diets. However, in my opinion, I think there remains some scope to refine some of the dimensions that are listed within the food environment in this framework, along the lines of what I presented in some of the earlier slides. So I'm now going to present a short synthesis of evidence of food environment research from LMICs. Here's a systematic scoping review of food environment research from LMICs that I published in 2019. And we included a broad range of search terms in conjunction with any of the 140 LMICs as defined by the World Bank in 2017. So as you can see here, we included food environment, nutrition environment, obesogenic environment, food deserts, and food swamps. So very much the literature that sort of self-identifies as food environment research or has a strong food environment perspective. And this is in acknowledgement that there is also a wide range of relevant literature which doesn't necessarily use this nomenclature, but here we specifically wanted to focus on the food environment research that is sort of self-identifies in that way. So the review features 70 articles, and as you can see in the graph to the left-hand side, the number of publications was found to increase per annum from 2009 to 2017. Studies were found to collectively span 21 low middle income countries. And as the pie chart in the middle shows, the majority, some 70%, were from upper middle income countries, whilst 26% were from lower middle income countries. Interestingly, we found no studies from low income countries. Studies analysed the food environment at national, community, school and household scales. And the quantitative studies were found to be the most common at 64%, followed by qualitative at 24%, and mixed methods with just 8%. Overall, we found a focus on overweight and obesity within the literature. The absence of attention to undernutrition was found to be a striking omission. We also found a lack of food environment instruments and indicators, and this is broadly consistent with existing reviews from high-income country contexts. So here's a map of the distribution of food environment studies included in the review. As you can see, there's a clear absence of food environment research across much of the African continent, and this remains a key gap within the literature, and it highlights the importance of this food environment research network and the work that needs to be done going forwards. South Africa was found to dominate the African-based literature in the review with 7 studies, with only 4 studies from elsewhere in the continent. So I'm now going to present findings from the review focusing on the community and school scales, where the majority of the evidence was based. Apologies for the amount of text on this slide. I did want to try and capture everything on one slide just to give an overview. I've included the reference numberings from the review in brackets should you wish to follow up on any particular area. As a caveat, we do encourage caution when interpreting the results due to the poor quality of the majority of studies, particularly those analysing associations with dietary nutrition outcomes. With that being said, amongst the literature characterising and analysing food environments, perhaps unsurprisingly, small and medium-sized market-based vendors were found to dominate across a number of LMIC settings, although non-market-based sources such as own production and wild food harvesting were found to be important in some settings. A number of positive associations were found between levels of urbanisation and the availability of market-based vendors, and evidence from multiple settings consistently found school food environments to be saturated with vendors selling unhealthy foods and beverages, and the targeted marketing of sweet and sugar beverages to children was also found to be evident. So looking at the common themes from the qualitative literature in the bottom left-hand corner, common themes included the increasing availability and acceptance of cheap, convenient, tasty and desirable foods that were often considered to be ready-made and also unhealthy. In addition, economic constraints were found to limit opportunities for healthier alternatives. Within the school food environment, healthier options were often found to be limited, and concerns were raised around food safety, misleading marketing, peer influence, and prestige associated with what was described in the literature as non-traditional foods, typically sort of street foods and fast foods, more commonly found in westernized context. In addition, school policies were found to be highly contested across a range of settings. So in terms of the studies with analytical studies assessing dietary nutrition and health outcomes, so the green box on the right-hand side, cross-sectional evidence for multiple settings found food availability to be associated with dietary outcomes at the community and school scales across multiple LMICs, although associations were found to vary by vendor type, and the literature was actually quite diverse in terms of the vendor types that were being studied. At the school scale, 2 RCTs, one in Mexico and one in South Africa, indicate the potential for supportive school food environments to improve adolescent diets. However, the evidence is far from conclusive, and the same actually applies for evidence related to nutrition and health outcomes. So in terms of reviews focusing on African contexts, this systematic review by Osei Kwesi et al. Focused on factors influencing dietary behaviors in urban African settings. It included 39 studies from 15 African countries. And I won't go into too much detail as I realize the lead author of this paper is actually about to present after this. But what I will say is that 77 factors were identified and mapped to this socio-ecological model. Studies exploring individual level factors were found to be dominating the literature. And there was a suggested need for more research exploring how social, physical and macro level environments drive dietary behaviors. They also noted a need to widen the geographical scope to encompass a wider array of African countries. And this is broadly supportive of the evidence from my systematic review, as I've presented earlier. And just finally, the paper by Osei Kwesi et al. Actually built on the work of Holsworth and Andes from 2019 and Justin et al. From 2017. Whereas you can see a series of factors influencing dietary behaviors amongst women in urban African settings are presented again across a set of multiple scales. It's interesting to see here some of the parallels between this and also some of the findings from the Drivers of Food Choice projects and also the ANH working group work. So in terms of conclusions, I realize this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of concepts and emerging evidence. It's quite a lot to take in. But in terms of the take-home messages, as I noted in the introduction, food environment research is developing rapidly in low middle-income countries. There's growing global interest in this research area. The limited evidence base from low middle-income countries, particularly from sub-Saharan Africa, should not be interpreted as to diminish the importance of the food environment on diets, nutrition, and health outcomes in these settings, but rather emphasize the need for more research as well as the need for improved theoretical concepts, study designs, and methods and metrics. Improving the quality of food environment research will be critical to the design of feasible and effective interventions. The box to the right-hand side of this slide outlines the research recommendations from my systematic review. Critically, there is a need to align theoretical concepts with empirical research in order to operationalize robust and coherent methods and metrics across a diverse range of settings and also multiple scales. And this clearly remains to be a key challenge. It's also important not to lose sight of the fact that food acquisition and consumption is fundamentally embedded within our everyday lives and activities and the spaces within which we inhabit. Participatory research methods, as have already been mentioned in the introduction today, may be key to investigating lived experiences of food environments and can provide contextualized insights into food acquisition and consumption practices. This was obviously beyond the scope of my presentation, but I thought I'd mention it as it's one of my main research interests. So just finally, I'd like to close by noting that interventions, policies, and program actions should be socio-ecological in scope, addressing both individual behaviors and also the environmental contexts and conditions that are experienced as part of everyday life. We know that individual behavior change is difficult to achieve without addressing the context in which people make decisions. So thanks very much for listening and thanks for the invitation to present here. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the presentations and the rest of the workshop.